Listen closely because this part changes everything you think you know about who know what governs power, not presidents, not kings, a god with iron lungs and a metronome for a heart. The ancients called him Kronos. In the archives, he becomes something colder, Saturn, the ringed warden of time. And if you understand what Saturn really is, not a planet, but a system, every headline, every ritual, every deadline starts to sound like marching boots. Picture this, winter 1983. Sand-lashed airfield outside Al-Qarir. A woman with moth-gray eyes, Mara Dax, an analyst on loan from an agency that didn't have a name on paper, steps off a cargo plane and into a story that will own her life. She's there for a recovery, a crate black and dull like cooled volcanic glass seized from a smuggler who never made it past the border. Soldiers joke that it feels heavier than it should, as if gravity loves it a little more. They pop the clasps. Inside, a carved basalt cube no larger than a child's skull, engraved with a six-sided storm, interlocking lines spiraling like a frozen whirlpool. Someone whispers, a hex locked in stone. Someone else says, Saturn. The wind answers by cutting the word in half. Dax doesn't believe in omens, but that night when the generator hiccups, the cube hums, not loud, more like a pressure behind the eardrum, the kind that makes you swallow and swallow to make it stop. The clock in the outpost loses 16 minutes. Watches refuse to agree. A captain mutters a prayer into his sleeve. Dax writes her first memo, Project Ringmaster, anomalous time drift in presence of Object S1. Back stateside, the cube lives behind triple glass and a smile that never reaches the guard's eyes. Dax learns the unofficial history no one publishes. Wherever empires stacked calendars high as towers, a Saturn story bloomed underneath. In Sumer, he was Ninur, the plower of destinies. In old Rome, Saturnus bound and unbound each midwinter when masters served slaves in a holiday theater of equality. A release, says her mentor, Dr. Calder, tapping the file, that teaches you your chains better than any whip. Gods don't run states, Dax says. Calder smiles like a crack opening. States run on schedules, schedules are Saturn. He shows her stamps, seals, and city plans that echo the cube, squares inside squares, rings around empty centers, the geometry of containment. What if the symbol isn't metaphor, Calder asks, but architecture, a machine that turns belief into calendars and calendars into obedience? The cube hums again, and somewhere a second hand hesitates. A new empire inhales. The first time Dax sees the film, she thinks the projector jammed. A grainy ringed planet fills the frame, clouds move like slow smoke. Then the camera tilts toward the North Pole and there it sits, six sides locked in a perfect storm, a geometric eye that never blinks. The hexagon, Calder says, almost fond. Jet streams that refuse to curve, nature choosing a shape we draw on floors. Dax leans in. The footage is archival deep space probe era, numbers flickering in the margin like a heartbeat. The hex doesn't wobble, it holds. Why keep this buried, she asks. Because people say coincidence, and then they start building cubes, Calder replies. And because some of us discovered that when you place the right shape in the right city grid, clocks run smoother, people too. He kills the projector and the room breathes again. On the table, maps of financial districts, Frankfurt, Hong Kong, Lower Manhattan streets recast as circuits, squares in rings, rings in squares. A tiny black cube sits in the center of each overlay like a fuse. We tested S1 with metronomes, Calder says. Left alone, their ticks drift, near the cube they sink. Then they accelerate together by a fraction that makes accountants wealthy and soldiers punctual. That's superstition dressed as physics, Dax says, but she finds her pen tapping in time with a clock she cannot hear. Calder slides a cassette across the table. Debrief from last week, play it. She presses play, her own voice speaks. Subject exhibited awareness of non-local schedule, then a skip. Another Dax continues mid-thought, lost 12 minutes between the generator failure and the second hum. Static, a breath, I did not blink. Dax stops the tape, I didn't record that. You did, Calder says gently, And your watch says you didn't. Saturn rewards those who keep time and steals time from those who question it. That is his joke. He walks her down to vault B. The cube rests under glass like a planet shrunken to fist size. The air around it feels thick, as if sound has to swim. A junior tech named Heller waits with a clipboard. His hair is too neat, his smile pre-timed. We logged a drift at 0314, he says. Building clocks advanced by 11 seconds, but only on the east side. West side lagged 3. The middle floor synced perfectly. Why the split? Dax asks. Heller shrugs. Load-bearing walls maybe, or the city grid beyond these walls. The cube listens to rectangles. Calder taps the glass. Structures teach behavior. That's the point of temples, banks, schools. You live inside parameters until your soul believes they are preferences. Dax studies the engravings, 6 rivers spiraling inward then outward like roads to a city that denies entry. She thinks of holidays where bosses wear paper hats and serve cake to interns. Release rehearsed as ritual, a ring that pretends to open. Where did S1 come from, she asks. A dig outside Kalat Sephra, Calder says. A chapel beneath a fortress built on a Roman storehouse over a Babylonian platform over something older. Each empire kept the floor plan as if afraid to move the walls. And who wanted it moved now? Calder's eyes soften. You'll meet them, they call themselves custodians, they say they guard time from chaos, but chaos to them is simply unscheduled miracles. That night Dax dreams of elevators that never stop and hallways that loop back to their own beginnings. When she wakes, her alarm reads 606. The red digits look like a small electronic hex. Outside, the city's streetlights blink green in precise succession, a domino of obedience. Somewhere below, a generator takes a breath. The cube hums far away, and every calendar in the building imagines it is the Earth. They arrive precisely at noon on a Saturday, as if they own the hinge where weeks turn. 3 of them black coats in summer heat, umbrellas closed like batons. Their badges say nothing. Their shoes say money. The receptionist's voice, normally bright, slides down a key when they pass, like a record slowed with a finger. The oldest introduces himself as Mr. Verrill, eyes the color of polished slate. We represent the Saturnian Trust, he says, a philanthropic consortium concerned with continuity. Continuity of what? Dax asks. Schedules, he answers, as if that explains gravity. They tour the facility with a familiarity that unsettles the guards. In Vault B, Verrill stands before S1 and removes his hat, not reverence protocol. He produces a small leather case and sets 3 objects on the railing, a brass hourglass no bigger than a child's fist, a ring engraved with 6 interlocking lines, a key whose teeth form a tiny hexagon. His colleagues, Maud with her quiet hands, Kemp with his metronomic blink, say nothing. We appreciate the recovery, Verrill says to Calder. The cube is part of a matched set. 13 were carved, 7 known, 4 in trust, 2 misplaced until now. Matched how? Dax asks. By ritual, by function. He gestures toward the engravings. 6 inward paths, 6 outward, 1 silent mouth in the center. Think of it as a governor on the engine of civilization. Keeps revolutions from chewing through their own pistons. We're a lab, not an altar, Dax says. Verrill smiles without teeth. You are an altar the moment you manage time. Clocks make priests of everyone who sets them. They move to the observation booth. Heller logs minute fluctuations as if tallying tides. Verrill watches with an indulgent air, then says, Tell me, Miss Dax, do you keep a Sabbath? I keep deadlines, she says. A modern devotion, he nods. Saturday was Saturn's day. The world pretended to rest to practice obedience. The cube reminds institutions of that pose. It lets them release pressure without losing control. Dax thinks of office wellness days, of sanctioned chaos that never threatens the ledger. You're saying S1 is a corporate chaplain. Verrill shakes his head. Too small a parish. It tunes grids, cities, currencies, elections. When placed correctly, it reduces variance. People feel freer. They choose predictably. Maud finally speaks, voice like silk torn from its loom. We don't force, we align. Calder leans into the rail, and the price. Kemp blinks once, twice, interest. The word sits between them like a coil of rope. Verrill pockets the ring and key but leaves the hourglass. A token of trust, he says, sand from a place that does not erode. He checks his watch, and for a heartbeat Dax sees 6 hands on the dial, all pointing inward. She blinks, the face is ordinary again. As they leave, Verrill pauses by the door. You'll receive an invitation, he says. There is a building that keeps Saturday alive in its bones. We'll meet you beneath it. When they're gone, the air seems to exhale. Heller pretends to busy himself with cables. His pen taps tick-tick-tick the way rain teaches a roof its purpose. Dax takes the hourglass. The sand inside looks darker than sand should be, as if it remembers being stone. What do they want? She asks. The same thing empires always want, Calder says. A guarantee that tomorrow arrives on schedule. He stares at the cube. They call themselves custodians, but every custodian answers to a master. The question is whether the master is a planet, a god, or the habit we've all mistaken for fate. That night, Dax walks home through a city arranged like a board, avenues the color of mathematics, buildings the size of promises. A billboard flickers, Saturday sale 1 day only, people hurry to rest. Somewhere above the grid, the week clicks into place like a ring around a finger. And in her pocket, the hourglass warms as if remembering the hand that last turned it. The invitation arrives as a thin black card, no ink, no emboss. Hold it to light and the lines appear, 6 corridors meeting at a hollow center, a date with no year, an hour with no meridian. At the bottom, a single word sublevel. The address belongs to a museum that used to be a bank, that used to be a courthouse, that used to be a temple. Saturday evening, the lobby is all hush and marble, a rotunda dome like an unblinking eye. Dax palms the hourglass, warm again, and follows a guard whose shoes don't make sound. He leads her to an elevator hidden behind a column thick as a tree. The panel has 6 buttons, B1 through B6. He presses none. The elevator descends anyway. When the doors open, she smells dust older than her language. Verrill waits with Maud and Kemp in a chamber shaped like a keyhole. The ceiling is low, the acoustics swallow footsteps. In the center, a circular dais inlaid with a 6-pointed diagram, each arm ending in a small pedestal. 5 hold cubes of different stone, obsidian, limestone, jade, something like burned ice, and a dark metal that drinks the light. One pedestal sits empty, its socket a mouth asking for a tooth. Your S1 belongs here, Verrill says. We call this the calendar. Dax circles the dais, a machine. A metronome, Maud says, for cities. Kemp offers a clipboard, purchase orders, shipping manifests, restoration photographs. Dax flips through everything immaculate, everything boring, the camouflage of power. Where did you get the others? Recoveries, Verrill says. Gifts, legacies, debt settlements. Sometimes people bring them when planes miss connections or stock markets remember gravity. And when all 6 are in place. Verrill steps onto the dais. The air grows heavier, the way air does before rain. We host Saturnalia, he says mildly, as if announcing a brunch. The sanctioned reversal, on paper chaos, in fact calibration. The word settles like a coin dropping into a deep well. You want our cube, Dax says, so you can throw your holiday and tighten every screw without anyone feeling the wrench. Feeling is the point, Maud says. People forgive correction when you give them laughter first. Kemp gestures toward a mural ghosted on the brick. Officials in togas wearing ridiculous hats handing cakes to grinning slaves. Around them 6 rings, each smaller than the last. Ritual is a user interface, he says. We update the software. Verrill takes the hourglass from her hand and turns it. The sand falls slower than gravity should allow, grains hesitating midair like birds remembering migration. This is not sorcery, Ms. Dax. This is infrastructure. Water wants a riverbed, time wants a hex. Say I believe you, Dax says. Why invite me? Because you work for a nameless agency that believes it supervises time's traffic, Verrill says without spite. And because you, personally, do not. You keep looking for the master switch instead of the manual override. Somewhere beneath them, a freight train moans through the dark like a wail. The floor trembles. For a heartbeat, the mural soldiers seem to breathe. Dax looks at the empty socket. It fits the memory of S1 the way a glove fits a hand. What happens if the calendar runs without one cube? Then the week forgets when to end, Maud says softly. Sleep becomes work becomes sleep, elections smear, markets invent Mondays in July, children learn appointments before they learn colors. Is that what you want? Verrill's slate eyes hold no triumph. We want continuity. Continuity keeps wars small. He reaches into his coat and produces a keyed teeth cut into a hex. He offers it handle first. Saturday is a door. Someone must hold it open and closed. Dax does not take the key. She watches the last grain of sand refuse to fall, and then with a tiny decision it does. The chamber exhales. Far above, a bell strikes the hour. Everyone looks up. No clock is visible, but the sound arrives on time. Back at the facility, the clocks behave like students after a fire drill, overly obedient, a little rattled. Heller has stacked metronomes in a neat hex on the lab bench, their pendulums ticking in military chorus. The cube sits behind glass, quiescent, the way a tiger pretends to nap. Calder reads Dax's notes without comment, then sets them down like a verdict. You went. I observed, Dax says. Observation is participation when the ritual wants witnesses, he replies. What did they ask? Continuity, she says, and a seat for S1 on their calendar. Calder's fingers drum an ancient rhythm on the table, dum 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 dum, the heartbeat of factories and marches. Of course, they'll call it safety, it's taxation. And taxation of what? He looks at the cube, unscheduledness. Heller clears his throat. We logged something while you were out. He flips a monitor live, a map of the city pulsing with tiny glyphs. Power meters, server logs, turnstile counts, transit swipes. Between 1800 and 1806, microdelays rolled through the grid like a shadow east to west, block by block. Nothing anyone would notice, but when you add it up. How much, Dax asks. Heller hesitates, 61 human years. He blurts it like a confession. Stolen in slivers of seconds spread across millions of people. Time shaved off commutes, hold music, elevator doors, buffering wheels, interest. The word hangs there, all tail and rattle. Dax feels the hourglass warm in her pocket again, as if responding to its name. Prove it. Heller pulls up anonymized samples. A turnstile stuck for precisely 0.4 seconds, a crosswalk button cycling twice, a video ad extending itself by a heartbeat, a hospital monitor buffering between beeps. Each delay wears the same signature in the metadata, a 6-character checksum S6TRN0 like graffiti on the universe. That's not possible, Dax says, which is the first prayer of any rationalist. Calder removes his glasses and rubs the bridge of his nose. It's not theft on a human scale, it's rounding error as policy. You skim a blink here, a half-breath there. No one raises a fist, but the ledger grows. Whose ledger? Dax asks. Heller doesn't look up, whoever holds the Saturday key. A badge reader clicks in the hall, the sound of clearance negotiating with secrecy. Agent Noor steps in, internal review sewn into her shoulders like rank. She's the kind of calm that learned silence in rooms without windows. Evening team, she says. I've been assigned to your hex problem. Calder's smile is a closed file. We were just discussing theology. Then you'll appreciate confession, Nor says, sliding a tablet across to Dax. On the screen, her own memo, the one about anomalous drift, stamped with a time she doesn't remember writing. Your report's present contradictions. Either you're losing minutes or you're inventing them to secure budget. I'm losing them, Dax says, and someone is collecting. Someone, Nor's eyebrow makes a small, precise angle. Dax thinks of Veryl's slate eyes, Maud's silk quiet voice, Kemp's measured blink. Of the dais beneath the museum, the missing socket shaped exactly like their problem. She thinks of calling them by name and watches the future close like a fist. Not someone, she says finally, something, a structure. Nor studies her, then the cube. My brief says you want to move S1 off-site. We were invited, Dax says. By whom? A trust, Calder answers, dedicated to continuity. In my line, Nor says, continuity is what you call a leash. She circles the glass. The cube seems to approve, its surface deepens like wet stone, the engravings breathing out a low, inaudible note that Dax feels in her molars. Nor stops, pen poised. If this thing is a metronome for a city, how do you stop the music? You don't, Calder says softly, you change the tempo. Dax pulls the hourglass and sets it on the table. The sand has sunk to a thin black meniscus, no grains falling, nor leans in. Is it paused? Dax flips it, the sand waits, then begins to fall, but wrong granules hesitate, cluster, leap in groups, as if obeying an external beat. On the monitor, Heller's map ripples in time. An ad server extends itself by exactly the rhythm of those falling grains. Somewhere, a patient's IV pump blinks twice between drips. Nor taps the glass with her pen. What is the rate? Heller answers without thinking. 6 parts delay, 1 part acceleration, net zero for the city, net profit for the calendar running the skim. Nor looks from the hourglass to the cube, and if we refuse the invitation. Calder's drumming stops. The lab feels suddenly too small, like a box closing. Then Saturday will collect anyway, he says, only without the theater, without mercy. Dax feels the shape of a decision step into the room like a shadow arriving before its owner. Or, she says, surprising herself, we crash their party. They plan it like a heist in a hymn. Nor handles the legal theater, an emergency inspection order that lives for exactly 49 minutes 7 seconds. Heller builds a parasite script that seeds the city grid with prime delays 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, irrational beats a hex can't swallow. Calder mixes ritual with sabotage, a replica cube cast in ferrite and soot, laced with a ring of copper to sing the wrong note when the room hums. Dax takes the hourglass and a pocket full of doubt. Saturday, the museum's public floors glow with curated silence. Underneath, the sublevel breathes. Attendees arrive without names, faces bare but posture masked, bankers in penitent caps, officials in paper crowns, actors playing servants to remember their masters. The dais waits, its 5 cubes exhaling a low frequency you feel more than hear. The 6th socket yawns like a missing tooth. Veryl meets them at the threshold, slate eyes amused. You came. We brought continuity, Dax says, lifting the padded case. Maud's glance skims Nor's forged badge, Kemp's metronomic blink counting their footsteps. No interruptions, Maud murmurs. Today the city resets its spine. Funny, Nor says, I thought we were here for a safety check. They mount the dais. Heller's script goes live. Somewhere uptown, a crosswalk hesitates on green just long enough to teach a suit patience. In the chamber, the air tightens. Dax opens the case. The replica cube drinks the light convincingly. Veryl inspects the engravings, nods once. Place it, he says. Dax doesn't. She sets the hourglass on the empty pedestal instead and flips it. The sand hangs, then falls wrong in sync with nothing, leaping in prime clusters. The 5 cubes answer with a startled shiver. Kemp's lips move 2357. Heller whispers into his collar, injection phase 2. In the city, elevators pause between floors and then decide to be generous. Video ads stutter, fail to claim their stolen heartbeats. Nurses find their monitors blinking in sync with their breathing instead of the server's clock. For one unsupervised minute, a subway platform sings out of time. Strangers look up and grin, confused, unafraid. The chamber does not grin, lights dim to a ring. The mural soldiers seem to lean closer. Verril's voice is very calm. You misunderstand the debt, he says. We don't hoard time, we buffer it. The interest we skim pays for the soft landings, the trades that don't cascade, the missiles that don't launch, the crowds that arrive 5 seconds late to the stampede. Calder falters, is that true? Maud's eyes are Wintersea flat. Continuity costs we collect before chaos does. Nor snaps the breaker. The hum collapses. Emergency lamps blossom like haloed coins. Maud moves fast, clean the way a blade remembers its forge. Nor meets her halfway. Badges mean nothing now. Kemp reaches for a panel. Heller spikes it with a burst of numbers that don't tessellate. Dax lifts the replica with one hand and the hourglass with the other. If your system needs our cube, she says, you'll talk terms, transparency, consent. Verrill steps closer, the calm of a surgeon and a captain. He holds out the hex key. Take it, he says softly. Finish the set, tune the city, or walk away and let the primes chew through joints until nothing bends, only breaks. On the monitor clipped to Heller's belt, a baby is delivered in the blackout. The midwife laughs, and the room laughs with her. The hospital clock forgets to tick. The child arrives anyway. The hourglass hesitates between Dax's fingers. Sand hangs like a choice looking for a hand to belong to. Well, Verrill asks, tender as gravity. Ringmaster or wreckage? Dax lowers the replica toward the socket, then stops, the hourglass heavy in her other palm, sand glimmering like a held breath. You're selling a false binary, she says. Obey the ring or drown in primes. Verrill tilts his head. Reality is often two-handed. Then meet the third, Dax answers. She sets the replica beside the pedestal, not on it. From her coat she pulls Calder, hack, a copper ring no thicker than a thumbnail etched with irrational intervals. She fits it snugly into the mouth of the empty socket, a wedding band for a bride that hasn't arrived. The dais inhales, a dog hearing a whistle only dogs hear. Heller murmurs, interface layer live. On his belt screen, the city blinks in uncertainty, then sinks not to the hex, but to a rhythm soft as breath, crosswalks packing strollers, inboxes opening when hands are free, transit gates reading the shy kid's card on the first try. The primes don't chew, they compost. Delay becomes slack, not skim. Maud lunges, Nor is already there, shoulder to sternum, two motions learned in rooms that never make the news. Kemp's fingers find a maintenance panel. Calder's ferrite cube hits his knuckles like a sudden god, and the panel slams shut with a swallowing click. Verrill doesn't move. You can't free a metropolis, he says quietly. You can only choose who disciplines it. Then we change the contract, Dax says. She lifts the hourglass. Time dividend, every skimmed second escrowed to the public, Saturdays that actually rest. Interest paid back as grace in emergencies, not profit. Maud laughs clean, bright, brittle. You want consent, post a poll. May we arrange your minutes? People hate choosing at scale. They outsource to us because confusion costs more than tribute. Not tonight, Nor says, pinning Maud's wrist. Tonight you itemize. Heller keys a broadcast. The chamber's hum threads the fiber backbone and rides every status page the city has. A message blooms on bus shelters, bank kiosks, hospital kiosks, time escrow active, your lost seconds will be RETURNED in kind. Below it, a slider, opt-in, opt-out. People blink, then press, curious, irritated, delighted. Opt-in lights the map like bioluminescent tide. Verrill watches the glow spread. His slate eyes soften, not in defeat but in recognition, as if a memory has stepped into the room. You're inventing a Sabbath with no priesthood, he says. An open Saturday. An honest one, Calder says, surprised to hear his own voice on that side of the scale. The dais shifts. The five-seated cubes harmonize with the copper ring, a sixth part implied by absence. The mural soldiers look less smug, more tired men at the end of a long play. A sound rolls through the stone, not the hum of machines but the click of an older lock. A seam opens in the far wall, air like mountain midnight sliding into the chamber. Behind it, a corridor angles downward, 7 turns, if Dax's eye is true toward a dark that glows at the edges. Verrill exhales. Ah, he says, the center answers. The mouth wakes when the calendar is contradicted, not completed. Maud stiffens. We were not briefed. No one is, Verrill murmurs. He looks at Dax, the hourglass, the ring she seated where a cube should sit. You've called the third hand, the one that neither adds nor subtracts, the keeper of unowned time. Nor meets Dax's eyes, do we go? Dax turns the hourglass. The sand hangs just long enough to be a promise, then falls in a rhythm that belongs to no calendar at all. We go, she says, and the corridor breathes them in. The corridor slopes like a thought you can't say out loud. 7 bends, each tighter, walls ribbed with ancient brick and newer conduit braided together, as if centuries of builders agreed to disagree and kept laying their versions atop the last. The air tastes of iron, citrus, and rain that hasn't fallen yet. At the 7th turn, the passage opens into a rotunda the size of a small cathedral. No altar, no benches, just floor-polished basalt inlaid with a perfect circle and a broken hex that never quite closes. In the center stands a column of glass, no seams, no door, inside it a ring of black sand hanging midair like a quiet storm. Heller whispers, that's not a display. Calder circles, fingertips hovering over old inscriptions, proto-Sumer to Latin to ledger shorthand. He reads them under his breath, a palimpsest of orders and apologies. House of Tenders, Chamber of the Unbilled Mouth of Saturday, he translates, almost reverent. Verrill stays near the threshold. Maud and Kemp flank him. Practitioners suddenly turn pilgrims. We fund the calendar, Verrill says softly, but we did not make this. We discovered it when the bank was still a court and the court was still a temple. We've never opened the mouth without all 6 cubes seated. Good, Nor says, let's do something you've never done. The floor warms under Dax's soles, a pulse she feels through the bones. The hourglass in her hand tugs lightly, curiously toward the glass column. When she lifts it, the suspended sand inside the column answers, rising in thin, braided filaments like smoke obeying an inverted gravity. Interface, Heller asks. Invocation, Calder corrects. Dax steps to the circle. We're not here to topple your calendar, she says, voice steady. We're here to add a third option, time held in common, no priest, no skim. The column dimly reflects their faces, each doubled, each slightly out of sync, as if the room insists you are always arriving late to yourself. Words bloom on the glass in a slow, silted script none of them recognize. Then, as if embarrassed, it rewrites them in the language each heart expects. Nor reads first, state your rate. Heller's eyebrows climb, it's asking for terms. Calder startled into a laugh, a central bank for minutes. Verrill takes a careful step forward. The mouth isn't an oracle, it's an escrow. Maud's jaw tightens, escrow answers to owners. Unless, Dax says, looking at the drifting sand, the owner is everyone who has ever waited. The hourglass warms to near pain. Dax places it against the glass. For a second, nothing. Then the grains inside her hourglass unstick and flow upward, joining the ring within the column. The room-sized stone and steel and policy all exhaling at once. On Heller's feed, the city ripples. Bus doors pause for a runner and close on time anyway. A traffic light considers an ambulance 2 blocks out and turns green without stealing from the cross street. The opt-in slider numbers climb like tide. The column writes again 3 words plain as a receipt: dividend authorized conditional. Conditional on what, nor asks. The answer crawls across the glass, courteous and merciless. No secret keys, no PRPTULS, no PRISTS. Verril's slate eyes shudder and open. It means us. It means everyone, Dax says. We publish the calendar, the cubes, the rituals. We make the cheat codes public domain. Maud's hand twitches toward a pocket. Nor gives a small, friendly shake of her head that says don't. Kemp, almost pleading, if you cut out custodians, the city will sprawl. Calder smiles, suddenly younger, maybe it will grow. The column's sand spins faster, a quiet black halo. A final line etches itself, not a demand but a compact: return what was shaved, begin at Saturday. Begin at Saturday, Nor repeats, as if reading a warrant to the dark. The column hums like far thunder. On Heller's feed, opt-ins keep blooming: barbershops, bodegas, hospital wings, a laundromat where someone tapes the kiosk message to the window with blue painter's tape and grins at passers-by. The city isn't voting so much as exhaling. Rate, Heller asks the mouth. The glass writes 121, no skim. Dax nods, every delay repaid as grace. Define grace, Maud mutters, but the room defines it for her. Vignettes spill across Heller's screens, little precise. A bus driver waits for an old man hustling with a cane and still hits the next green wave. A clerk's register freezes, then pops a free receipt saying time credit applied. A nurse's break extends by 60 clean seconds when her hands finally stop shaking. Kemp stares, you're dissolving margins. Redistributing them, Calder says. Margins are just decisions in costume. Verrill watches the black halo quicken. He removes his hat the way a sailor does for a squall and holds out the hex key handle first again. Continuity through consent, he says, not quite smiling. Let's publish the machinery. Nor turns to Heller, push everything, diagrams, ritual, the copper ring hack, the ledger format, license it under no priests. Heller hesitates, then breathes and executes. Across municipal servers, then out into the open net, the calendar unwinds like a blueprint you're allowed to copy. A watermark rides the files. Open Saturday/time is commons. Alarms at last. The museum's internal security, men whose faces have learned to look like walls, move on the sublevel. Maud doesn't wait for them. She moves to the dais, hand diving for a recessed kill switch. Nor is already there, a pivot and a catch, a quiet no spoken with bone and leverage. Calder taps a slider on Heller's belt. The copper ring sings a tone that turns the kill switch into a polite idea and nothing more. The mouth writes again, escrow seated but hold. Dax frowns, hold what? A line etches itself as gently as a bruise. Pledge minutes voluntarily, no tithe. Seed capital, Calder whispers. It wants a starter gift, not shaved, not stolen, given. Verrill bows his head. A pledge from us would be priestcraft, he says, stepping back. The rule says no. Nor clicks her pen once and pockets it, then from everyone. Heller patches the prompt into the broadcast. A new slider appears under opt-in, donate 1 minute /5/10. The numbers climb, not title this time, but steady like bread rising. Kids in a gaming cafe slap the lowest option in high five. A rabbi hits 10 with a shrug. A woman in a precinct house rolls her eyes and taps 5, then 2 more for luck. A guy in a suit, alone on a bench, gives 1 and looks embarrassed about feeling better. The column brightens, if black can be said to brighten, and the ring of sand expands infinitesimally. Dividend pool active, it confirms. Saturday window OPNS 18002000. Maud swallows. A Sabbath gap, she says softly, like someone recognizing a childhood song on a stranger's radio. 2 hours with no skim. 2 hours with a surplus, Dax corrects. A city returned to itself. Security finally spills into the rotunda, boots and bark, nor raises her badge and voice at once. Federal injunction, sublevel is an escrow site. You touch anything, you're impounding public property. It shouldn't work. It does because on their wrists the guards watches skip and then add a second, a weird kindness that confuses reflex into curiosity. One of them, kid, jaw set, glances at the column, at the sliders on the kiosks his own mother uses, and lowers his baton first. The mouth's last line for the night burns in with a kind of weary love. Publish or perish by dawn. Meaning, Heller asks. Meaning if we hide this it closes, Nor says, and the old skim returns meaner. Verrill meets Dax's eyes. I'll testify my name will hurt and help, that's the tax. Maud exhales defeat and something like relief. Kemp rubs his knuckles where Calder's fake cube kissed them and laughs once softly at himself. Dax steps to the column. The hourglass thrums in her palm, wanting to belong. She presses it to the glass. It dissolves into the hanging ring, sand joining sand, heat leaving her hand like a vow fulfilled. Goodbye, little priest, she whispers to the hourglass. Be common. Somewhere above, bells mark the start of the window. In bodegas and ERs, on factory floors and stoops, the city glows at the edges, the color of a rule finally, briefly choosing mercy. By dawn the files are everywhere, mirrors of mirrors, diagrams on streetlight poles, kids remixing the coppering schematic into zines and stickers that say no priests in bubble letters. The museum's rotunda turns into a newsroom and a chapel at once. Verrill gives a statement with his hat off. The cameras love his penance and hate his diction. Nor reads the injunction into a dozen mics unblinking. Heller pushes a status page that anyone can read. How much time was shaved, how much pledged, how much paid back as grace. Calder sits cross-legged against the wall, listening to strangers argue kindly. The first Saturday window passes like a held breath finally released. The city doesn't freeze, it loosens. Elevators open faster for strollers. Kitchens fire orders in the sequence that keeps tempers cool. The subway doors seem to know the difference between a rush and a panic. On every corner, someone checks their phone, frowns, then smiles at nothing. For 2 hours, nobody feels handled. Pushback arrives on cue, statements from desks with eagles, from chairs upholstered in old money. Unscheduled interference will impair critical systems. But hospitals report fewer code blues during the window. Trading floors discover they can complete without shaving. Churches move evening services and call it providence. Bars do too and call it luck. The argument shrinks to size. Maud comes without an entourage. She stands at the sublevel threshold the way a swimmer meters a cold lake, then steps in, hands visible. I was trained to trim panic, she says to Dax. You made a place that absorbs it. Not me, Dax says, nodding to the column, its black ring now wider by the width of a minute hand. Us, and a mouth that hates owners. Maud looks up at the broken hex in the floor. Ritual wanted a priest because it feared forgetting. You built memory into the street. Kemp arrives with a box of pastries and a sheepish grin. Interest in kind, he jokes, and Calder laughs like someone unlearning a flinch. They test the second window, more opt-ins, more pledges. A busker on 8th strums 7 notes that never resolve. People throw coins anyway because the unresolved feels honest. A traffic cop pockets her whistle and walks a kid across against no one's will. A woman closes her laptop and for the first time in months does not feel behind. Night circles, the mouth writes one sentence no one expects, export available. Beneath it a list blooms, other cities, other grids, other calendars kept beneath other respectable buildings. Verrill rests a hand on the stone. Continuity by consent, he says again, as if practicing a language he intends to speak fluently. What about the cubes, Heller asks, the ones still hoarding time? We won't raid altars, nor says, we'll publish doors. Dax stands under the domed hush and watches the sand, a quiet galaxy uncounted and unaccounting. In some future, someone will forget this fight and still walk through its mercy without noticing. She loves that. Above ground, Saturn rises late, pale, and ringed over the skyline. It isn't a tyrant anymore, it's a reminder. A planet that wears its debts where you can see them. Dax turns to go. The third hand, she says to no one in particular, belongs to whoever needs it next. On a bench outside, a child counts seconds on her fingers and then stops, satisfied without knowing why. A bus arrives just as she stands. Somewhere a factory whistle waits an extra beat and nobody dies for it. The week slips its collar. Saturday learns to open without a master. And all over the grid, clocks continue steadier now because for once they are not alone.